Hello, thank you for watching. This is a satellite picture looking down on California. This is not from today. This is from yesterday, Tuesday morning. I'm showing it now because you can see that neat low pressure system spinning counterclockwise, what we call cyclonically, just off the coast, really, San Francisco here, kind of in the middle of the picture here. If you look closely at it, you can see that spin, like I was saying, counterclockwise, but it has this cloud field kind of pattern around it. And I want to point that out because if you look closely, that pattern, it almost looks kind of like a honeycomb. And there's a reason for that. And I think it's kind of neat. That kind of honeycomb structure is because those clouds are trying. They're not so successful, but they're trying, especially if you look at some of these two-form hexagons. It kind of turns out that hexagons in nature are pretty common. That's a six-sided polygon, right? Like a honeycomb. It's an efficient way, in this case in the atmosphere, to distribute heat evenly. But it's also an efficient way to distribute tension or force. And so we've found that hexagons are pretty common in nature now. Here are clouds. We call these closed cell convective clouds here. There's a counterpart called open cell convection, which also happens out in the ocean as well. But even something like I mentioned, a honeycomb forms that, if left to dry here, starts out something circular, but as it kind of slowly molds and forms later, it forms this hexagonal shape. Now, believe it or not, the bees aren't forming the hexagon themselves. They're just forming these little circles here, and then as it dries, it distributes that tension evenly in that hexagonal shape. That's just kind of a quirk, a geometric quirk of nature, if you will. Maybe kind of a more crazy, cosmic, extreme example of this would be the polar regions of Saturn. This is a picture looking down on the one of the poles here on Saturn, and you can see even in this kind of cloud field around the pole, likely because of maybe wind speed differences around the polar region, it's also trying to form a hexagonal shape there as well. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You can see it's not a perfect one, but it's kind of leaning certainly in that direction. Perhaps, kind of the same phenomenon that you're seeing here in the cloud field just west of San Francisco. Didn't think clouds and Saturn and bees had something in common, I bet, just a few minutes ago, but now you might think that. Okay, let's catch us up to present day here. This is fast forwarding just about 24 hours here around lunchtime. Still have that kind of weak remnant low pressure system off the coast of San Francisco and central California here to the west of the coastline. A few other things just kind of quickly to point out here. Not a lot going on across the western region. If you look at the cloud field here, a few kind of brief showers sprinkling through the Idaho-Oregon border area, some high clouds further south over Arizona. But if you look over the Pacific Ocean further west, these clouds have my attention a little bit, and you can just kind of look and see that those are moving pretty quickly. There's quite a few of them. That is the jet stream that we're keeping an eye on here. You can see it moving very quickly from west to east toward the coastline of North America here. So this, just kind of quickly glancing at the satellite, visible satellite, at least here around lunchtime on Wednesday, looks like it's going to be a player in the forecast. Let's keep that in mind as we kind of step through things. This is just the visible satellite imagery, so we have to kind of deduce all that, but let's just go right up to the upper levels of the atmosphere and look at where those high wind speeds, or that jet stream level wind speeds, are moving here as we get through the middle of the day. There's those fast winds that we just kind of circled on the slide before, quickly coming out of the Pacific here, a trough a little bit further north and northwest associated with that. If you look closer to California, there's the subtropical jet stream that we've been following all winter. It has been kind of well south of our area for most of kind of the last 2 months or so. It hasn't really been a big player in our weather. You can see this little trough here bringing those high clouds over parts of maybe far southeastern California and certainly Arizona earlier on that visible satellite imagery. Just take a quick look at these are temperatures here around lunchtime. Again, not the coldest or warmest day across the region. I think maybe for California we're talking about 60s through midday, 80s in Arizona, a little bit cooler in some of these southern states here, kind of relative to where they typically are in late April, early May. As you go further toward the northeastern Washington, in the 60s as well, including the Snake River Valley, 60s in northwest Montana. Well, up here, a 60-degree day comparatively is quite a bit warmer or more seasonal than if you have a 60-degree day in southern or south central California as well. So actually not really a terrible day up here relative to where we're typically at in late April, just in terms of those temperatures. And if we just jump over and look at the forecasted high temperatures for Wednesday afternoon here relative to average, that's the coloring on this map here. That's why I like to show this one. You can see that for folks in Oregon, Montana, certainly Idaho, even Nevada and Utah here, much warmer temperatures here relative to their average versus states like California, Arizona, and then the western regions of Oregon and Washington. I want to catch us up on the drought monitor as well. This is valid as of last Thursday. It will be updated tomorrow. Not expecting any major changes on the updates tomorrow, but we are keeping an eye on a few things as we get into the summer months. Kind of naturally less rainfall to be had as we go through the summer. Want to keep an eye on, I should say, the areas where we're dealing with drought now, potentially exacerbating those issues as we go through summer, right, and then get into fall again. Where are the areas we're going to want the rainfall when we get back into the kind of let's call it the start of the water year as we get to the end of the summer this year, and then thinking about the monsoon as well. So 2 areas of concern that kind of jump off this map here. We talked about this, the Four Corners region, which is forecast right now in some of those long-range seasonal forecasts to have more heat, potentially less rainfall over the monsoon season. I think the last 2 videos I talked about kind of what's looking maybe at least right now very early, but could be a more paltry monsoon season. So the fact that we're going into the summer already with some lingering dryness issues, maybe not the best considering not expecting the biggest monsoon. That being said, in just a few slides, I'm going to go over kind of the Lake Powell, Upper Colorado, Lower Colorado River Basin, and the water situation there has improved quite a bit, substantially from where we were even 2, 3, 4 years ago. So potentially less of a monsoon season, but at least in terms of the river network here, looking at increased water, and I'll show you that in just a second here. If you look to the north, northern Idaho, the mountains of Montana as well, kind of what I'll call the northern U.S. Rockies, this area didn't get a lot of snowfall over the winter. We talked about that, throughout certainly the turn of the calendar into 2024. And without that snowpack, there is this kind of drought concern going forward through the summer when we get into the prime kind of heat and lack of rainfall for this area here in the Northwest. Now, it's not, an extreme or exceptional drought at this point, save for these 2 small local areas here along some of these border regions. But just the fact that we're going into summer with this drought already established, it is an area of concern if we lack the water here going further throughout this year. And then potentially, you think about the fact that we're at least more likely than not going into a La Nina at the end of this year, kind of 24 to the 25, that is 2024, 2025 water year. We typically, there is a correlation here between La Nina and actually more precipitation for the Pacific Northwest, and that can sometimes extend further inland as well to parts of Idaho and western Montana as well. So it might be the case that if this dryness and the heat kind of builds in here in the summer and we're talking about wildfires or something of that nature, that we're rooting for a La Nina in areas up here where we could get some of that rainfall deficit worked out and get more precipitation, maybe more snow up into that area next winter. Feels too early to talk about all that. We're still quite a ways, from fall or Halloween or Christmas, let alone. So I don't want to talk too much about that, but you can kind of see where my concerns are lying right now in terms of the drought situation as we get into the warmer months here. Speaking of the warmth, we're also getting into snowmelt season. A few things we're juggling here as we go through April into May. Even though the weather's kind of calming down, there is some still kind of water conversations to be had. This is looking at the snow water equivalent for the state of California. That's the black line on the screen. Now, this from the USDA. This started last water year, so that's way over here on the left side of the screen on October 1st. You can see this black line is where we're at in this water year. That is the 23 to 24 water year. The green line, which I know is hard to see when it gets on video, that green line you can see running through the middle of the screen, that's the average accrual of that snowpack water equivalent in a given water year, at least for California. And you can see at the start of the year, we were well below average. We talked about this, in some of the forecasts from much earlier this year. And we really caught up as we kind of went through the end of February and March. In fact, that blizzard that we got at the beginning of the March in the Sierra Nevadas, look at how much work that did in terms of catching us up, not only back to average, but then a little bit above that as well. You take out that blizzard, and it's hard to say if we even ever get back toward average. We probably stick closer to this below average area here underneath the normal graph. But we did get above it, and we've had these recent kind of, not the huge snowfall events, but just these kind of light to moderate events, a few inches here and there, maybe up to a half a foot or so, and those helped as well. And now we're officially back into that snowmelt season. So can't rule out another kind of light snowfall. We'll talk about that as we go through the forecast here, but certainly in earnest starting that kind of the snowmelt season. Now the good news is, we're getting water back in the hydrology, but we're also not dealing with the 23 water year, kind of the 22 to 23 water year when we had all that snow. In fact, if you look at the top of this graph, I've highlighted this purple line here, this purple one, which is kind of blending in with the blue normal maximum here. That's last year's water year. So you can see all the snowpack we had yet to melt through last year. We're dealing with flooding issues. We talked about that, the Tulare lake bed, other flooding issues. You had a lot of the dams releasing water. Of course, when they release it, it's harder to hold on to it, just for concerns with flooding. And so we're dealing with that as well. Not looking like we're going to have a lot of those issues this year, unless we were to have this kind of huge heat wave build in May. And as we get into the forecast, not seeing anything like that as well. So more manageable, I think, on the water side this year for California. And coming out of a normal year, I don't think that's a bad thing with the improved water situation. It's a similar story shifting east this year into the Colorado River region. This is looking at the upper Colorado River basin, where that river gets quite a bit of its budget of water here. Again, this black line is the water year this year in terms of snowpack and snow water equivalent in that upper Colorado basin. And we're right on normal. In fact, got up to above normal here this year, and we've started that snowpack melt season as well here in late April into May when that really peaks. You can see that normal graph really plummeting quickly before we get into kind of the middle of June. So officially underway in the snowmelt season, getting the water from the higher elevations in the mountains, melting that with some of these warmer temperatures and getting it into the various reservoirs, hydrology, streams, etc. Look at Lake Powell over in northern Arizona on the border of Utah here. This is looking at it over a year period, starting May of 23 and coming out to May of 24. If you look last year, we were much further below where we were over this year, and that's just due to the big snowpack that we had last year as well. You can see that as that snowmelt season began, it's kind of the reverse of what the graph was that we were just showing. That helps the water get into the reservoirs. You can see that build up here as we went through the summer of last year, slowly withdrawing from that bank throughout the year at the end of last year in 2023. But then if you look really closely, and I'm guessing this is pretty hard to see when I get this on video here, but we've kind of turned the corner, and I think what we're going to see is what we saw similar to last year with that increase in the water storage here at Lake Powell as well. So improving the water situation in California. To the east, improving the situation in areas like Lake Powell. This feeds into Lake Mead, south of Las Vegas as well. Just a very different story than the kind of La Nina plagued, repeatable, and dire drought, frankly, that we were dealing with kind of at the beginning of the decade. Now, potentially going into La Nina here next water year, we'll have to talk about some drought concerns, but looking at a much better situation here today than we were just a few years ago. This graph kind of clicked crazy here. This is from the Army Corps of Engineers. This is looking at the King River, the Pine Flat Reservoir. What we're really looking at here is this blue line. That's the storage in Pine Flat here. That's been increasing through the new year because of all the snow and the rain that we got in the Sierra Nevadas. But if you look closely at this bottom graph, this green line is the inflow into the reservoir here. And you can see that with all the rain and the snow we've had this year. We've had that inflow increasing. This orange line is the outflow. So you can imagine if you have more coming in than you have going out, you're increasing that storage. So that's the blue line up here. So this makes sense. Right now, this green line's above the orange line. We're increasing the storage all the while. But if you look closely just over the last few days, we've had that inflow really shoot up here. I think what we're seeing here is some of the snowmelt season beginning. So expecting even further improvements here on some of these reservoirs along the Sierra Nevadas and further north as well. Want to get you out into the forecast here, caught up on the water situation. These are looking at those upper level winds. We actually looked at a very similar graphic earlier. This is looking at that European model forecast here for those jet stream level winds going out over the next 7 days. To kind of catch us up to where we were talking at the beginning of the video, if you look kind of to the left side of the graphic here, there's those fast jet stream level winds that we pointed out earlier. Just a few slides ago, there's that kind of subtropical component of the jet stream flowing over Arizona, bringing those high clouds here on Wednesday afternoon. I'm going to take this forecast out into the future, and you'll see that that kind of jet stream extension, if we want to call it that, from the polar jet stream coming out of the Pacific is starting to approach now tomorrow, Thursday around lunchtime, Oregon, parts of Washington, and Northern California. So expecting inclement weather to pick up as we go through the day Thursday for areas around here. If we take that forecast forward into the future, you can see that plunging into a bigger upper level trough situated over the western region here, bringing probably colder temperatures in would be my guess when we talk about these troughs across the west region. Potentially bringing a break to some of the precipitation we'll probably see on Thursday as we get into Friday evening and Saturday, something of a short break. If you look closely, there's kind of this notch in the jet stream level flow, expecting potentially more inclement weather through the weekend for parts of the Willamette Valley, western Washington, northern California, just with this jet stream oriented, kind of pointing right at this area here. Would expect more inclement weather. Take that forecast forward into the future. Not a huge change into Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, potentially now a trough building in over the kind of British Columbia, Washington area here. Might as well take the forecast out a little bit further from the ECMWF. You can see that trough settling in now just off the west coast. So there's a lot going on there. To boil it down, we're looking at more inclement weather coming for the western region, certainly for areas like Oregon and Washington, kind of right under the influence of that jet stream coming onshore above our heads, and potentially parts of California and the interior as well. To kind of break all that down, let's jump over and look at the European model forecast for precipitation type and intensity through the weekend. We'll get into next week as well. This is valid as of Wednesday evening, just some light lingering showers here on the interior. Nothing too much to talk about, but you'll notice as we go through the day Thursday into lunchtime, there's the influence of that strong upper level jet stream coming in here. Rainfall beginning in the Willamette Valley, western Oregon on Thursday, even parts of far northern California. Take that forecast into the future through Friday evening, I should say Thursday evening into Friday morning. Continued rainfall across parts of the Pacific Northwest, getting into parts of Nevada as well, trying to sneak more into northern California. Kind of remains to be seen right now whether this gets, at least some of this rainfall gets into the Sacramento Valley or maybe the Bay Area as we go through the day Friday. I think it's going to be light. That's what most of the forecasts have keyed in on. You'll notice that the ECMWF forecast specifically, that's the European model, trying to bring in these very light showers to parts of the Bay Area and the Central Valley of California on Friday evening. Expecting more so some of the shower activity to be on the interior, so maybe even like Las Vegas, expecting more rainfall there than, say, the Central Valley of California. All the while, we're here Friday PM, still looking at some rainfall lingering in western Oregon and western Washington as well. I did mention, because that jet stream kind of shifts further toward the Four Corners region, that we clear out a little bit through the day on Saturday. But you get into Saturday PM with that jet stream just lingering in that position that we talked about, expecting kind of more bouts of this precipitation to come through. See another bout that we had on Saturday night, maybe a short break Sunday going into Monday. But as that trough kind of situates and sets up just off the coast of British Columbia and Washington, like we saw earlier, if that's going to position something like this, we're going to expect increased precipitation here midweek next week, which gets us into the turn of the month toward May. Take the forecast a little bit out further beyond. This is kind of out of the realm of what I'll call confidence or accuracy, but I'm showing it because the chances are there that if that trough sets up and really kind of entrenches itself just to the west of the American coastline here, potentially more precipitation chances, snowfall chances for some of the mountain ranges here toward the end of the week next week. This isn't an exact forecast. I'm not saying next Friday we're going to get this rain in the Central Valley or on the coast of Northern California or Eureka area, etc. But the chances are elevated that this area, even out toward the end of next week, even maybe getting out of next weekend, could see more inclement weather, potentially cooler weather as well. Because of that uncertainty, let's look at a different forecast here. This is from the GFS. I'll take this through the next few days. It's going to look very similar to that European model forecast. As we go through the day Friday here, you can see that jet stream level winds coming on shore here in parts of California. Ever so slightly further south from the GFS here, this might help a little bit more rainfall get into maybe parts of the Sacramento Valley, maybe an errant shower and drizzle getting through the Bay Area again near San Francisco as we go through the day Friday into Friday evening. At least maybe for central and coastal California, not expecting a huge rainfall event out of this, but likely with this jet stream level winds, the low pressure system associated with that, looking at more breezy conditions for coastal areas of California as we go through Friday evening into Saturday morning. If you look at take it out a little bit further than that through Saturday and Sunday, kind of similar from what we saw with the European model, multiple bouts of precipitation expected for the Pacific Northwest through the weekend into early next week. There's that upper level trough situated just off British Columbia and Washington here, probably bringing more moisture, clouds, precipitation into the Pacific Northwest as we go through midweek next week. And if this does kind of situate like this, where you have this jet stream level wind coming into California here off the coast of the Pacific coastline, could be looking at inclement weather through parts of Central Valley, coastal California, Bay Area as we go toward the end of next week. So that story that we just heard from the GFS is pretty similar to what we just saw from the European model. Not a huge difference of opinion here. That does increase our confidence that at least the forecast that they're both showing has a higher chance of occurring than not. So looking at potentially inclement weather at the end of next week as well, unfortunately. If we just kind of go through the precipitation forecast from the GFS, you'll see kind of similar Friday into Friday evening here. This is now valid as of just kind of before dinner time on Friday. See some of that rain getting into Northern California, maybe the Sacramento Valley, just some light precipitation amounts, kind of curiously keeping the Bay Area free. I mentioned Las Vegas Friday evening as well, looking at rainfall. Rain and snow showers across the interior, snow at higher elevations here in Utah and some of the other mountain ranges here in Idaho. Not expecting a tremendous kind of increase in the snowpack here, but it's not nothing. It's not going to be nothing for the Cascades, but not one of these big significant events that's going to, save the season or anything by any means. Take the forecast through Saturday into Sunday evening. You can see increased precipitation chances for the Pacific Northwest as we go through Sunday evening, potentially even Tuesday and Wednesday as well. There's Wednesday evening. And then finally, as we go through Thursday into Friday. Again, this forecast kind of out beyond the realm of confidence, but that chance of increased inclement weather for this area here, I think, continues at the end of next week. For the precipitation total numbers from the ECMWF forecast, this is valid as of next Wednesday morning, so pretty much almost a perfect 7-day forecast for precipit totals. Here you can see all the focus here, 1 to 2 to 3 inches of rain for folks here in the Pacific Northwest, maybe something closer to an inch or a little bit more here in the Willamette Valley, higher amounts as you get into higher levels of elevation. But if you look toward the south, California specifically, you see this rainfall here in Northern California, not quite as much. But if you go south of there into the Central Valley, into the San Joaquin Valley, not a ton of really any precipitation here. This is essentially just kind of maybe an errant shower or two, or maybe some drizzle, talking about maybe 1/10 of an inch, maybe slightly more in some of these coastal locations here. So not a huge precip event for California, maybe more breezy going through Friday evening. Certainly cooler temperatures. We'll talk about those in just a second here. And can't rule out a little bit of snowfall increase here for the Sierra Nevadas as well. But talking more about precipitation up here in the Pacific Northwest than California from this event, and then potentially Las Vegas as well going through Friday evening. These are the forecast high temperature anomalies. This is valid as of today. We actually looked at this forecast earlier when we were talking about that high temperature forecast for Wednesday afternoon. If we go through Thursday, you can see the influence of that low pressure system and the jet stream now showing itself along the coastline here. Colder temperatures tomorrow. That includes Friday, Saturday, as that system tries to exit the Four Corners region Sunday, and then Monday, trying to warm up a bit here in some of these southern states, but we have that kind of increased flow here lingering in the early part of the week toward the Pacific Northwest, if you remember that, keeping temperatures down in this area. This only goes out to Tuesday, but if I took it Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and that trough does develop over here, would expect increased cooler temperatures for this area, and then maybe next week increasing cooler temperature concerns here for parts of California or Nevada. Too early to talk specifics about that, but where we do have those troughs lingering, you have to watch for some colder temperatures underneath those as well. Kind of another kind of quirk that we think about with those troughs building in across the west region is that tends to bring jet stream level flow kind of over some of the Four Corners region and pushes that out into the central plains of the United States. And if you think about what month it is, we're kind of at the end of April here, getting into May in the central plains, I think about tornadoes and Tornado Alley. That's the climatological peak for the tornado season in the central plains and for some other states here. And with this jet stream level winds rounding the Four Corners region, rounding the western U.S. like this with these troughs, bringing the colder weather and the rainfall that we just talked about, it actually sets up to be a pretty good recipe for severe weather. So while our weather is maybe getting a little bit more annoying or colder, a little bit more inclement, harder to enjoy the outside, for folks in the central plains, it can get pretty serious with that kind of same setup. This is for Thursday afternoon. So looking at potential severe weather along the central plains, kind of right in the Tornado Alley. And then if I take this into next week as well, this is Saturday into Sunday. See, right over Oklahoma, right over southeastern Kansas, northern Texas. I mean, this is your kind of quintessential Tornado Alley in May. So our weather connected, of course, to what's going on in the central plains, kind of that setup or recipe there for severe weather. So wouldn't be surprised to see, as we kind of close the book on Saturday, potential severe weather reports, maybe tornadoes, hail, and wind in Oklahoma. If I take this forecast out into the future, you can see that trough setting up this weekend. We kind of talked about this across the western region. Again, that's that recipe for the severe weather in the central plains. Take this forecast into Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. You can see that trough influence still over parts of the Pacific Northwest, keeping that inclement weather around there. Kind of the question becomes, do we get this big trough developing off the coast of California and Oregon going through the end of the week next week? The forecast that I'm showing you that I just kind of click through, this is from the GFS Ensemble forecast, and it shows that increased chance of troughiness across the West Coast, bringing inclement weather into this area, keeping temperatures down kind of over that same area as well, out toward the end of next week, kind of starting off May. Unfortunately, a little bit cooler, a little bit more inclement than it otherwise would be. If we look at the Climate Prediction Center forecast for that first week of May, you can see those below normal temperature forecast here from the folks at the Climate Prediction Center. Warmer across the interior. Look at precipitation as well over that first week. Increased precipitation chances likely for parts of Oregon, Northern California, maybe even through parts of Nevada and Central California up into parts of Idaho, Washington, and Montana as well. If I take the forecast, extend it out a little bit longer, now looking at a May forecast. This is from the ECMWF extended forecast. Of course, when we get out beyond 7 to 10 days, always have to remind us that not talking about as confident of a forecast here, but unfortunately, even looking at this forecast here, seeing these drier conditions over the interior, this kind of sparse wetness across the Northwest, and then more so looking at the increased precip here across the Central Plains and the Northern Plains. This looks to me like maybe a little bit more of the same as to what we just saw in the forecast. That is flow that looks something like this, kind of bringing some of these precipitation chances in here for parts of the Pacific Northwest and Northern California, but really increasing the storm chances here for folks along the plains and east of the divide. If we jump over and look at the temperature forecast for May, this is from May 1st out through June 1st. You can see those colder temperature anomalies, unfortunately, for folks in California, parts of Nevada, parts of Oregon, even northern Idaho, western Montana. And that's just kind of, again, lining up with likely more troughs in this area. Again, flowing across that Four Corners region, likely looking at a bigger severe weather season in May for folks in the Central Plains. But that means for those of us over here in the western region, some cooler weather, more inclement weather to start, maybe not start summer, but in spring and get closer to summer. So I wrap up here, I want to jump over. These are the sea surface temperature anomalies here valid as of yesterday across the globe. If I just kind of glance at this, of course, in the middle of the Pacific where we look at for El Nino, kind of this area here, certainly the water temperatures in here still warmer than average. We're kind of on this side of the color bar. That's why we're still in an El Nino. But those have been weakening all the while over the last few months. We can see these colder ocean temperatures developing just along the equator. And I mean really just along the equator. If I zoom in, you can see right along the equator some of these blue colors here. Those are those cold ocean temperatures trying to extend toward the west, toward the Central Pacific. Kind of look beyond that, you can see some colder water here in the Southeast Pacific, some colder water here in the Northeast Pacific, and then quite a bit more warmer water here in the West Pacific. Kind of all these things together, I kind of see those. I think it starts starting to look more La Nina-y. And what I mean by that is La Nina, we typically see more warmer water here. We see colder water in through here, colder water in the Southeast and Northeast Pacific. This is our negative PDO signal that we've been keeping an eye on as well. It's starting to look La Nina. Technically still in an El Nino. That's likely to be the case for a few more weeks here. We'll see as we get into June if we can shift into a ENSO neutral state. But the expectation right now, this kind of La Nina signal will continue, whether we get into kind of a weak, moderate, or strong La Nina as we go through the water year, that remains to be seen. But certainly at a glance here, this is looking less and less like El Nino and more like a kind of La Nina year setting up as we go through the year here. If we look at the ECMWF forecast, I'll make this valid as of the April. Expecting that El Nino will drop to ENSO neutral at some point here in the summer months. You can see those in the forecast along the bottom. And again, there is some uncertainty as to how deep of a La Nina develops. There is some uncertainty if a La Nina develops at all, but at least from the image that I just looked at, definitely looks more like a La Nina situation going forward than something like an El Nino. But there is some uncertainty as to the depth or the strength of that La Nina that we'll have to account for going forward because of the reasons we talked about at the beginning of the video, the reservoir situation, the drought in the Four Corners and up in the northern U.S. Rockies as well. I think that's my last slide. That's all I have for you all today. Hope you learned something, enjoyed it, and I'll talk to you all next week.